Okay, we're getting some thunder. I don't want to lose it. I don't know exactly what I'm going to talk about, but I think it makes a good background. Well, I used to go to the mailbox. It was a better part of a mile to walk. And I used to come around the hill here and to the gate, and then up the road down to Nicky's, and then down to the bottom to the beginning of Dan's Lane, and just along the bottom past the main house, and then past the pond. Of course, the pond wasn't there in those days. Up the hill towards Charlie's, and down to the mailbox. So it was a long walk, and it was just as long a walk back. And sometimes there was mail, sometimes there wasn't mail, but it was a nice walk. But I said, more likely, if I write letters, I'm going to get letters. And I was living in the back barn. I didn't have electricity. I didn't have a telephone, and there wasn't a phone too close by. I'd get to call my mother often enough to make everybody happy. But I decided that I would start writing letters to my mother. And of course, I had the worst handwriting, but it didn't take long for the handwriting to become very legible. So I would write to my mom, and I'd write to other people. So this way, there'd be more likely there'd be some mail. And then one day I realized if I went up to the upper orchard and went down that hollow past the sugar house, it'd be a nice little shortcut. And there were a couple of little deer paths in there. So I started to go that way, and it wasn't long before I had beaten, so it was just a nice little path. And that upper orchard was on a little bit of a bench. And I remember one day I was walking up there, and I could hear the creek roaring behind me after a heavy rain. And all of a sudden, I took one step. I couldn't hear the creek anymore. And I stepped back, and I could hear the creek. And I stepped forward, and I couldn't hear the creek. And that was remarkable. And so when I come back, the same thing happened. I'd be walking up to the top, and I wouldn't hear the creek, and I would take one step forward, and I would hear the creek. So that bench just hit the line where you could hear things that was going on. Well, one day Beth and Charlie were going somewhere. I don't know if it was Detroit or if they were going down to Mexico for that Comedia dell'arte workshop, somewhere where they're going to be gone for a couple of days, whatever. And they asked me if I would take care of the chickens, which meant putting them in the chicken house at night and letting them out, make sure they had water, make sure they had grain. And of course I got to keep the eggs. And it was something that I could do in conjunction with going to the mailbox. So I would do it. So one day I got there, and I could see something had been in the chicken yard. I don't know what it was, but there was a whole bunch of feathers and some blood and stuff, so you could see that something had got a chicken. So I had to be diligent. So next time I come, I had my shotgun with me. Nothing much going on. Went to the mailbox, came back. Well, the next time I go, I'm approaching the chicken yard a little more quiet. Now, these wild animals, they're smart. They know the routine. If there's nobody in the house for a couple of days, they know, because there's no one coming in, there's no one going out, there's no noise. So anyway, I get up to the chicken yard, and sure enough, there's a hawk in there. And I scare him, and he tries to lift off, but he was so startled, he didn't get off the ground fast enough, and he ran into the chicken wire. Well, I ran into that chicken yard, and I grabbed him right above his claws, and I held him out there at arm's distance from me, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I don't know who was more frightened. Probably me. I know that he'd never been held by anybody before, and I certainly hadn't held a hawk. So anyway, I'm holding this hawk out at arm's length and trying to figure out what to do, and my heart's a-pumping. Well, anyway, right there was a couple of pieces of roofing metal and half a roll of tar paper and a couple of other things. Well, I just sort of put the hawk down, and covered him with this roofing metal and this piece of roofing paper. And I guess I was going to go up and try and find a feed sack. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to kill the hawk. I wanted to capture it. So I went off to see if I could find a feed sack or a cage or something. And, well, the next thing I know, he got himself loose and he flew away. So I never did catch him. It was quite an experience. There was a couple of nice hawk feathers here. However, we didn't have any more trouble with that hawk in the chicken yard.